This presentation is going to give you some ideas about the kinds of things that you might talk to a third grader about to help them understand place value better. And this is not like the lesson the teacher would teach. The teacher is going to teach it probably like a math lesson and go through whatever the math book says. But this is just a way that you can converse and ideas of things to talk about to help a student understand place value better. These are the kind of problems that a third grader will see relating to place value. So they're asked to compare using the greater than or less than signs or equal. They're rewrite the numbers, write a number if you're told what the digit in each place is, etc. So this is the kind of thing that their teacher will teach them how to do. These are some retired items from the California Standardized Math Test for third grade on place value. There were more on the test that were retired that you can find online as examples. These are the kind of questions that the students will be asked at the end of the year on their standardized test. So these are some topics that as a tutor you can go over with a student who understands, who's getting the problems right, or a student who is struggling. They can all benefit from discussions about these things. And then based on what the student tells you and how they respond, you'll know whether or not you need to spend more time on that. Order and orientation of objects is something that research has shown can be a roadblock that keeps students from understanding. The role of zero is something that's interesting. If you've got a student who thoroughly understands and you need to spend time with them, but they already know how to do all the problems, you can talk about the role of zero or the history of zero. It's just because it's fascinating and might pique their interest. Other place value systems, so that they understand this is not necessarily the absolute way that numbers are written. This is one way that numbers are written. And I'll give examples of other place value systems. You can also Google and find out. And then it's really important that they understand the vocabulary, because the questions on their tests, if they don't know the vocabulary, they won't know what they're supposed to do. Research has shown us that some students don't always understand on their own when the orientation of an object matters and when it doesn't. And they can be confused by the fact that the chair, for example, when we reorient the chair, it's still a chair. But the letter B, when we reorient it, it becomes a D or a P. It changes what it is. And the same thing with the greater or less than signs. So you might talk to the student and make sure that they understand sometimes orientation matters and sometimes it doesn't. And do they fully understand that that's something you need to know? Does orientation matter? And then talk about those greater and less than signs and how do you tell them apart? A mnemonic that helps a lot of kids is gator eats greater. If you look at those greater and less than signs as an alligator's mouth, the alligator always eats the greater number. And just like orientation, knowing when orientation matters and when it doesn't, it's also critically important that the students understand that there are times when order matters, the order of objects, and times when the order does not matter. This is another thing that research has found that some students don't just naturally catch on to. So talk about it with the student, and maybe they did naturally catch on to it. But if not, you want to make sure that it's something that they understand. This is a critical thing. Order doesn't matter when you have 2 dimes and a penny. A dime, penny, dime is the same as penny, dime, dime. But with a 3-letter word, the order of the letters matter. And just talk about, have the student come up with examples, other examples of when the order of things don't matter versus when the order does matter. And it can be a good idea to link things to something that the students already know. They know when they sound out a word, they know they need to know where to start, that you start at the left and move to the right. And the same thing with when we read a number. So if you get the feeling that it hasn't really sunk in for the kid, you can just make examples. Use words that are different words when you change the order, and compare that to different numbers. Now sometimes the students learn the words and they just think it's a math word like place value. And you can, in conversing with the students and just talking to them, you can point out that order matters in our numbers because each place has a value. That's why we call it place value. That it's not just some math word, place value. Each place has a value. You can have a student read numbers saying all the place values, like 2000s, 0 hundreds, 3 10s, and 1 1. You can talk about the role of 0 as a placeholder. And that's a good lead-in, depending on the student, to maybe talk about the historical origin of the number 0. It's really easy to find information on the history of 0 on the internet. Here is a map with a timeline that shows that different cultures first introduced the idea of 0 at different times. It's important for students to understand the difference between digits and numbers. And that blends for a lot of students where they think those two terms are synonymous. We have 10 digits, and we can write many numbers with those digits. If you've got time, because the student already understands how to do all the problems, what you might want to do is give examples of a different base, numbers in a different base, like base 2, which is how different parts of a computer communicate with each other. They communicate with numbers. But they only use 2 digits, 0 and 1. They can make a whole language out of place value. Remember, digits and numbers are 2 different things. They can make a lot of numbers, but they only have 2 digits. It's like computers don't have 10 fingers, they have 2. They only have 2 values, 0 and 1, and the way they represent these is by on or off. But there's a lot of similarities with their place value versus our base 10. The numbers are read left to right. 0 is a placeholder. To a bright, even an average third grader who understands place value when it's first introduced, it can seem like much ado about nothing because they already know that this is a 10 and the tens place, and it's just not that hard to understand. And they may wonder, why are we spending so much time on this? But if you contrast it for them with a different base, it suddenly becomes a much bigger concept. And third graders can understand base 2 if you explain it to them. We have actually explained it to third graders, and they've had no problem understanding it. In fact, they kind of liked it. They like learning. Depending on when in the year you're working with the student on place value, they may or may not know how to multiply 10 times 10 times 10. But if they do, one thing to help them recognize is the pattern of how to come up with the next place value. And if you do have a student who is interested in hearing about other bases and how they compare to base 10, what's the same and what's different, you might show them how we would come up with place values and help them see the patterns. Pattern recognizing is a key mathematical skill that's one of the standards for third grade. Students may ask you, looking forward, how am I going to use this later? There's a lot of good answers to that question. They're going to learn to add and subtract by lining up the different place values. They're going to regroup. We don't call it borrowing anymore. I did write borrowing there, but they changed it to regrouping because borrowing has the context of you're going to give something back. That confuses the kids. So we regroup, we carry. Some of them will learn about numbers and other bases, which you may have told them about when just discussing place values. They will revisit place value again and again throughout elementary and middle school because place value is one of the most important concepts. And of course, there's always just help them with the homework, help them understand what the problems are asking, and whenever possible, engage them in conversations that will help them understand some of these basic underlying concepts that relate to place value. It makes it more interesting, it makes it more engaging, and it also helps lay the foundation for them to have a better understanding of place value and the importance of place value.